So last time I spoke about reframing perception, and that we literally can educate our perception processes from a materialistically oriented way to a more cosmological and sacred perception. That's like a work, we can consciously decide to do, and I think that's what all spiritual practice systems offer in different ways. So we can, choose to intentionally train in what's Robert Bayer called a soulful perception in order to restore sacredness, bringing back a perception of sacredness is becoming really more and more important for our species, because we are living generally in such a shrunken, contracted perception, which definitely cuts us off from reality. And we can see if human beings are threatened or perceived to be threatened, then as all other animals, we tend to contract. And then if we contract in order to protect and defend, and then we are not just contracting internally, our whole world contracts. And then, there is a lot of fighting and things like that going on. So, that's one of the basic understandings which have brought us all here, to some kind of a practice, and to this gathering in particular. Because, we all have experienced, consciously or unconsciously, that it's impossible to separate consciousness from perception. Because this process occurs so quickly and is so tightly packed. For example, with the hearing sense, we first hear a sound, and then there's a lag before we identify it. Or we don't actually see a tree, we see patches of green and of brown, and then the mind perceives a tree. It's the result of training, of our species, of our culture, and all of that. And, perception can, because of that, perception can also be fooled. For example, the well-known story with, somebody walking in the forest and then looking on the trail and seeing something long and thin, and for a moment, oops, thinking it's a snake, the whole body jumps back, and then looking again, and it turns out to be just a root or a rope. Or, being able to see faces in the clouds when we are relaxed. Or I remember when I was a child, we had a certain cupboard in my room where the grain of the wood, I would look at it when I was lying in bed, and it showed me different faces, and I really enjoyed that. So this fluidity of the perception process, is something we can experience, and it is taken to the ultimate with full awakening. The full awakening, of an arahant or a Buddha. Because, one of the special qualities of an arahant, which is mentioned in the suttas, is that they can perceive the beautiful in the unbeautiful, and the unbeautiful in the beautiful, as they choose. Because they are in control, so to say, of their mental processes. And, to be able to see the unbeautiful in the beautiful is, for example, the contemplation on mortality, on death. Contemplation, for example, how the body composts and falls apart and goes back into the earth. And, that was given as a way to handle, strong sexual desire, for example, to imagine, the that the body of that person, would, start to get old, sick, die, fall apart, and compose back. And there are quite a few teaching stories in the suttas. I remember not exactly, but with some of the bhikkhunis, who some of them have been very, very beautiful women and were, very enamored with their own beauty. And then he would conjure up image, where they would see the beauty fading, getting old, getting sick, dying, falling apart. And it said, that someone who has seen the Dhamma, who is, has seen behind the surface, they can still see a beautiful person. And even, the body might still react with a sense of wanting to be close. But at the same time, there's also there the knowing, the knowing, yes, okay, in the moment it is like this, but it's not going to last. And it's not like a negative way of looking, but it's just real. So being able, to see and hold the paradox of both being true, it's beautiful, but it also is, on the other hand, not really only that. It is both. And that's a great power, to have that. And I think, that starts already with stream entry, with the first, stage of awakening, that there's a certain amount of that capacity becomes available, but then that becomes more and more, and it leads to this passion, the fading away of passion, the fading away of coloring our perceptions in a way which they are not really. And that automatically, fruits in letting go. So it's educating our inclinations and habits. And one way also how that can be done is through external observances and precepts. Where with the help of the 5 precepts or the 8 precepts, or, the precepts of a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni, we, essentially, faking it until you make it. So the point of the precept, is not, to be a good boy or good girl, but it's training the mind. And using the precepts as a container, to bang against sometimes, and then, oops, waking up and reflecting and, letting go, restraining for the moment, and restraining and abstaining. And then over time, it starts to sink in. For example, starting with abstaining from killing insects, where in the beginning we might just have slapped a mosquito or, squashed an ant, and then starting to know we're gonna take some care and, let the ant crawl on a piece of paper and carry her outside. And then gradually, we train the inclination. At the beginning, it's difficult when we are fighting, against the urge of habit. And then at the end, the desire is just simply gone to do something a certain way. I have definitely experienced that, over this long time since I'm training. It's a gradual process. And that's why it's called the gradual path. And in the suttas, the Buddha often compares it with the ocean floor, which slopes gradually. Slopes, gradually. And then sometimes there's a drop off, and then it slopes again. So by going through the process, of getting to know our habits, training in awareness, and also, in metta, in loving kindness, how we meet those habits, until it's integrated and frees us increasingly from suffering. And, refraining perception is very, very helpful here. Particularly at this time where it's about a whole cultural paradigm, which needs to be shifted, which needs to be expanded. And, in the way in these sessions, we are reframing perception to train ourselves to experience ourselves as part of a living, intelligent earth, what we really are, but we have grown up in a culture where that was not really ever talked about at all, or if only a very tiny amount. And I have a lovely example about reframing perception, two actually. One comes from Ajahn Bunadhammo, who is a teacher in the Ajahn Chah lineage, and he said, I didn't know that when he was in Thailand, and I remember that too, the cicadas in the forests are extremely loud. I mean, it's deafening, really. In the beginning, I just thought I can never, ever, meditate because it's so, so loud. And so you go into the, you go into the monastery, often they have a wall around it, and then you go in there and it is really so incredibly loud. But then if you live there for some time, you only notice it when they don't make the noise. Yeah, it's really intense. And he said, once he heard that the name for those insects is actually trumpet of the devas. Devas are the angels, that they're called the trumpets of the devas. Then he just thought, okay, and his mind just relaxed and opened up, and there was much less resistance. And I thought it's a very good example. Just naming it in a different way, and the mind and the heart respond. Language is so powerful because we think in language. And then also heard Joseph Goldstein saying, that he heard of somebody else that they had a sound coming from the basement. And it was like a chirping sound. And they were thinking, the birds have been, making a nest in the basement. And soon we're going to have little babies coming and so on. They were all quite endeared with all of it. And then at some time it turned out, no, it was just like kind of an alarm, for the heating system. And then the perception changed and it became annoying, So that is really, really powerful. And to, consider that in terms of the way, we have created the culture we are living in. Culture of being bombarded, by certain messages day in and day out, which are all really not helpful in regards to realizing ourselves as part of a living, intelligent earth. Or maybe, they have been helpful in the way that they got us to the edge of this denial, and then we started to wake up. So taken to an extreme, it always, becomes, at one point it hits the maximum and then it starts to go in the other direction. So we really, need to take the opportunity to harness the power of perception, because we really need to get any help we can muster, because, these are challenging times. And the question is, how do we become cosmological beings again, rather than increasingly desperate consumers? Rather than increasingly projecting out the desperation onto marginalized groups. How do we find a way back into what Carl Gustav Jung called the unforgotten wisdom at the core of the psyche? The unforgotten wisdom at the core of the psyche. this deep visceral knowing that we are part of a living intelligent being, even of a living intelligent cosmos. And that we can, as earthlings, we can intentionally attune to the earth for guidance. As we undergoing together, all of us, inside of the earth, as participants of the earth, we undergo this adjustment process. And we can be guided by this intelligence. Which in a Buddhist world we call it the Dharma, and in other systems it's called God or Allah or whatever it is called. It doesn't really matter. What matters is to turn towards it, to attune to it with reverence and humility. And, getting going all the support systems we can to help us, to help us to cultivate perception in a way which is more in accordance with reality, and releasing certain holding patterns, which are just conditioning. And if we can release those holding patterns through the skillful use of perception, new energy, new support flows into our being, and there's much more capacity to flow with what is happening. So please, let's change over to meditation posture if you're not already doing that. A posture we can sustain for about 40 minutes. With the deep conviction that if we look at ourselves in a different way, we will see and experience our world differently. Snapping out of this very impoverished way of seeing the world as environment and what it can give me. And that being everything which matters. This is such a small way of looking. So, coming into the body. Sensing the weight on the cushion on the chair. And with the out breath, letting go of any tension you carry, maybe tiredness or confusion. Just letting it all be. And breathing up the stability and kindness of the earth, which is looking after us in so many ways. Since the very first moment, we were conceived really by our mothers. And not for 1 second, have we been able, or did we live outside of that embrace? And even, relationship with our caregivers might have not been perfect, because they never are. Nevertheless, we've made it here, and our wounding is at the same time the opening through which we can work to expand perception. Just by the willingness, to touch that with a lot of kindness and presence. The wounding, is the opening where the work can begin. Whatever we have experienced, abandonment or shaming or overwhelm, all of it. So bringing awareness to the body, inside the energy body. Which is, no different from the body of the earth. And the aliveness, the vibrancy of that presence. And reflecting on the good fortune we have, to be able to meet in this way. to have these teachings which help us to connect with this innate knowing that there's more than just our personal stories. Our personal memory, guiding us towards wholeness and meaning beyond the surface level of our egos. Through letting go. And by expanding perception, letting go happens. And it's also that letting go enables the expanding. As I said earlier, that the principle fake it until you make it. In the beginning, it's a systematic practice, and then it becomes more and more easeful, and more of an improvisation rather than a structured approach as it integrates. And the presence of others, doing it as a community, as a collective, a ceremony, a ritual setting is always helpful. Because these big questions of our time, they need that communal holding. It's a joint venture. It's an eco-cultural update. We are undergoing, and it comes to us from the depths of the cosmos, from the depths of this planet, into our bodies, which are the same as the body of the planet. They are of one process. And this way of practice is inviting that update, that rewiring. From the ground up on a visceral, embodied, somatic level. Not from the head down, but from the ground up. Sensing and eating, drinking, breathing. And remembering that unforgotten wisdom at the core of the psyche. And learning from indigenous cultures which have kept that connection going, through rituals and ceremony. And that's why, they take care of about 80% of the biodiversity on this planet, even they make up only about 6.2 or 6.5% of the global population, because they viscerally do know that they are part of a living intelligent earth, in particular where they live in their territory. This is just like deeply embodied knowing, and we need to reawaken that for ourselves, and we need to find ways how to live that in the third millennium. To work with our own indigeneity to this planet. How can we embody that? If we live in the city, if we live in a small place, in a small apartment or house, how can we reclaim this indigeneity in a way which works at this day and age? This is something to grapple with and to trust the guidance. I think that's, the stage of the confusion and not knowing is very important part of the process, to honor that and to engage with it with humility, like an earthworm, as I sometimes say, that the willingness to do that work of making oneself available without knowing where it's going exactly. And the fear and the old unfinished business which all comes up as we engage in this way. And then again, the trusting and community of we're doing it together. Not only, just as a little pocket of sanity here on those Wednesday gatherings, but also in a much bigger way. In terms, what's called the beings of the three times, the beings of the past, the beings of the present, the beings of the future. So that's a way, how we can expand perception in a very skillful way to give us a sense of deep time. And companionship. So today I brought an invocation of the beings of the three times, which I found in a book of Joanna Macy. It's just a little bit adapted to our needs here. And it's a ritual invocation that affirms our connectedness with those who have gone before and those who come after us, as well as those living now. And we are doing that to evoke solidarity with all these beings across time, opening us to the inspiration they offer by heightening our sense of gratitude and responsibility. And in that way, opening up more energy for the work. And it goes like this. And I also did it at the last Earth Listening Circle last Saturday here. It goes really very well. And we usually do it standing, but we can just do it sitting in this format. We call on beings of the past. Be with us now, all who have gone before us, you, our ancestors and teachers, you who walked and tended this earth, be present to us now, so that we may carry on the legacy you left for us. Silent in our hearts, we say your names and see your faces. Gather with us now in this hour. Join with us now in this place. And we call on the beings of the present, all with whom we live and work on this planet. Be with us now. Fellow humans, as well as brothers and sisters of other species, help us call forth our collective will and wisdom. Silent in our hearts, we say your names and see your faces. Gather with us now in this hour. Join with us now in this place. And we call on beings of the future. All who will come after us on this earth, be with us now. It is for your sakes too that we work to bring healing to this world. We cannot picture your faces or say your names, but we feel the reality of your claim on life. This helps us to continue the work that must be done. so that there will be for you, as there was for our ancestors, blue sky, fruitful land, and clear waters. Gather with us now in this hour. Join with us now in this place. And sensing into the heart. As we are training to experience ourselves as parts of this stream of beings, which comes from deep time, all connected with this forgotten wisdom at the core of the psyche. Or, what Robert Baer is calling a soulful perception. A very powerful wellspring of motivation and energy and awe or reverence, or however we want to call it. It manifests in different ways at different times. And it's a visceral knowing. Somatic experience. Which is deeply nourishing and attractive, enticing, however you want to call it. It's a very deep resonance of meaningfulness or preciousness, or value, or however you want to call it. It's like a compass. And in one way in the Buddha's dispensation, how we can connect with that is also with what's called the three refuges. And the authenticity which we sense as we are opening to these deep callings. Which echo, through deep time. And there were ages, when they were more met with humility and reverence, and then there's times when they get covered over with lots of distraction, but they always come back again, because we can't really live without this. It's like as important as drinking and breathing and eating. And if we don't come back regularly to this place, we get more and more neurotic and psychotic and violent. And a culture which has lost these rituals and ceremonies to refresh the connection gets more and more off kilter. And then we can have an administration which is completely cruel and intentionally traumatizes people in order to lead, or in order to oppress. We need to do what we can to stay connected to that unforgotten wisdom at the core of the psyche. Universal truths. And once we have come into resonance with that unforgotten wisdom again, there's a sense of, yes, the heart leaps up. There's a sense of recognition and deep meaningfulness, sensefulness. Not by thinking about it, but by experiencing it viscerally. Like things align. And that's very inspiring and nourishing. And that's what we try to co-create here together in these sessions, to come and experience it together as a nourishment, like coming to the gas station and getting a refill, so to say. Then we carry on. And over time, we become more and more independent, also that we can do it also on our own if we need to, but it is natural to do it in community. Because for this kind of work, the psyche, expects community, because it is about all of us.